Hi, welcome back to my GCSE poetry set of lessons on YouTube. My name is Dr. Jane. This is for my students at Langdon Park. In the last video we looked at Wilfred Owen and his poems on the First World War. And what we're looking at is multiple viewpoints of the First World War. And in this lesson, we're going to look at two other poets that look at the legacy of the war. And so for Wilfred Owen, it's the experience of trench warfare, that because he was an actual soldier in the war. But for Ted Hughes, it's the legacy of the soldier experience and how he imagines it. And then we're going to look at the viewpoint of someone different, a mother at home. And for the poems themselves, I'm not going to actually do live annotation in this video, but I'm going to set links for both my annotations of these videos at the end so that you can do them on your own. What you should be practicing with this video is reading and annotating for yourself, applying those skills, doing the personal response, and the creative writing. Because the creative writing will give you three different perspectives on the First World War, which is, again, our learning intention for this series of lessons. Okay, so the starter we're going to look at is these posters here. In these posters, cartoons, and in your own imagination, how were women and girls' experiences incorporated into World War I? So on the left there, you have a cartoon of a German soldier. The drawing is entitled Seduction. He's gagged and it seems handcuffed or tied up a female prisoner, and he threatens her with a gun, and he's slowly caressing her chin, it looks like, in a menacing way. In the second poster, we have women in Britain say go, and we have different women kind of embracing one another, looking at, with their child kind of hovering at their knees, looking out to see their men going off. Here in the third one is by the same cartoonist from the First World War as the first one. We have a drawing of a German soldier who there were rumors in atrocity reports that though it never there was no evidence of this, but there was a rumor, there was an idea that Germans were bayoneting children, kind of putting them on the stake there. And then on the right, Belgium was, of course, invaded by the Germans, and I believe this is an American poster to remember Belgium, buy bonds, Fourth Liberty Loan. I think it's an American. But if you look at the shadow of a young girl being dragged away, again, the menace of kind of a potential sexual violence, I think, is there. I think women not being soldiers in the First World War, we imagine that they were victims. They were always potential victims. They were the people men were fighting for. They were the home. They were there fondly looking out and supporting their sons. And this is something I want you to think about, is how the First World War exists in your imagination. All the tropes, stereotypes, mythologies, how they function there is something that these poems all play with or speak to. And the fact of the matter is that these are mythologies, that World War I, for example, was not just about trench warfare, and there were many different fronts and many different people fighting and many different perspectives. So, for example, in Ireland, there was the Easter Uprising, the Irish Rebellion against British rule that was put down. Here we have a picture from 1915 of Indian sepoys executed for rebellion. You have women who are working in factories. You have all sorts of different perspectives and people whose experiences of the war aren't always the things that you immediately think about, particularly when you look at World War I poetry. So I just want you to think about for a second, and if you could speak to someone or you could write, how does looking at World War I from multiple perspectives help complicate our understanding of the past? And how effective, again, in your opinion, is art and culture for conveying or imagining the past? I mean, again, a poem is a very particular, like a poster or a cartoon. They're very particular artifacts for looking at the past. Are they the most effective? Are they distorting of your idea of what World War I was about? Okay, so hopefully you've looked at these images, given an opinion, and now we're going to move on. So as I said, we are looking at the legacy of the war, and today we're going to look at a poem by Ted Hughes, and we're going to look at a poem by Jane Weir. And what we're thinking about is how the imaginary of the world war functions within these poems. And what you'll be, because I won't be guiding you in this reading, you will be practicing the process of reading the poem multiple times, trying to find meaning, trying to figure out what the poem's about, literally, what the poem's about thematically, what is the poem's message, let's say, and of course then you'll be going beyond that into thinking about its structure and its imagery, and moving into your own personal response and creative responses. Okay, so let's begin. Here are two images. Could you compare the emotions of the soldiers in these two photographs? What experiences and emotions did soldiers expect to have in war? What experience did they actually have? How will Hughes's poem be similar or different to Owens's poem? If you could predict that. Oh, I see a typo there. Hughes's, I forgot my apostrophe. So if you want to pause now and just think about these photographs and think about if you could remember what Owens' soldier felt about the war, in what ways do you think Hughes, who's writing a generation later and imagining his father's experience in the war, how do you think he's going to have his soldier feel? Okay, so you made your prediction. Now we're going to go into the poem. Now, what we do is we read the poem at least twice. One of the things I would like you to notice as you're reading it for the second time is the enjambment, the way the line flows over for Hughes here. Something else to notice is the imagery. Another thing to notice is the confusion and the anger. If we just looked at a kind of stripped out version of the poem, which is what I've done here, we have these lines. Suddenly he awoke, his sweat heavy, dazzling with rifle fire. Dazzling with rifle fire, bullets smacking the belly out of the air. Lugged a rifle numb as a smashed arm, patriotic tear, sweating like molten iron. Bewilderment, running like a man who has jumped up in the dark and runs. The shot slashed furrows. Threw up a yellow hair that rolled like a flame, crawled in a threshing circle, mouth wide, open silent, eyes standing out, plunged. King, honor, human dignity, etc. Drop like luxuries. Get out. Blue, crackling air. His terrors, touchy, dynamite. From these words, just a strip-backed version and the imagery there and the language there, can you generate 5 questions you have anticipating what you think you're about to read? What words appeal to you? What ideas appeal to you? If you could write those down now before reading the poem. Now, if you could read the poem on your own once, I'm going to read the poem with you for the second time, and then I'm going to give you the structural break. Okay, so here I am. I'm going to just, I'll give you, Bayonet charge, Ted Hughes. Suddenly he awoke and was running, in raw seamed hot khaki, his sweat heavy, stumbling across a field of clods towards a green hedge that dazzled with rifle fire, hearing bullets smacking the belly out of the air. He lugged a rifle numb as a smashed arm, the patriotic tear that had brimmed in his eye, sweating like molten iron from the center of his chest. Oh, I said I wasn't going to annotate, but I feel like I have to. So, in the middle of things, we start. And, that reason for fighting, love of country, now turns into the kind of tears in his eye is sweating out of his chest. It's a strange juxtaposition. I'm always a little bit uncomfortable with that, but it seems that like his sadness or his kind of romanticism about why he's fighting is now transforming into this sweat. He's dazzled. He's hurt. He is here nature isn't strong, but the bullets are strong. His arm is completely sorry, not his arm, sorry, his rifle is completely numb as a smashed arm. It's he's just carrying, he's pulling it along, he's not using it at all. In bewilderment then he almost stopped. In what cold clockwork of the stars and the nations was he the hand pointing at the second? It's a rather grandiose idea. All of a sudden he felt frozen in the air, and he imagines himself as a clock leaping out, and his hand is pointing at a very particular moment. It's time has frozen. Time has frozen, and he's trying to think about the significance of this moment. He was running like a man who has jumped up in the dark and runs listening between his footfalls for the reason of his still running. And his foot hung like a statuary in mid-stride. So we see him. So in fact, I'm just going to take you back to this image for a second if I can. That one up there, that's the one I think of. That one leaping up there, pointing at a time in an imaginary clock. I think that's the image that Ted Hughes is going for. So there's all this chaos, and this like time stops for a moment. And whereas the stanza here gives us a clear moment, here we get a break. Then the shot slashed furrows threw up a yellow hare, a rabbit, that rolled like a flame and crawled in a threshing circle, its mouth wide, open silent, its eyes standing out. Look at that natural image. Frightened. He plunged past with his bayonet toward the green hedge. King, honor, human dignity, etc. That etc. helps us realize that's a list of things that he's mocking. He no longer cares about. We see how far we are from Tennyson's idea of not reasoning why, not making reply, to do or die. No, it's all nonsense now. Because these things dropped like luxuries in a yelling alarm to get out of the blue, crackling air. Beautiful image. His terrors, touchy, dynamite. His fear, exploding, touchy, just ready to explode. There you have this amazing poem of Ted Hughes's. Now, I don't know if this matches your predictions of what you thought, but could you generate 5 questions? Hopefully you've done that. If you could read the poem again, I will send a link at the end of this PowerPoint to a more thorough reading of the poem. When we think about structural analysis, the poem looks something like this. The chaos in the middle of things. There's a pause, a realization, a frozen moment. So this is significant somehow, this moment he's in. There's another break in the action where a rabbit kind of pops out into the middle of this bayonet charge. And he realizes that all the reasons for going to war mean nothing. That's a really simple breakdown of the structure of the poem. And that forms the kind of argument and the thematic realization of the meaninglessness of war. And you see here what Ted Hughes is doing is he's taking this legacy established by Wilfred Owen and the other war poets, the anti-war poets of the First World War, and he's taking that idea because that's the way the war exists in his imagination. And when he's imagining his father's experience, he makes it more cinematic. He makes it more active. He makes it more a whirlwind than Wilfred Owen does. Wilfred Owen talks about the banality, the boringness. This, for Hughes, it's the energy, the excitement. But notice it's this complete rejection. This war is stupid. War is dumb. I shouldn't be here. This is meaningless to me completely. Okay, so now that's my reading of the poem. I would like you to, because this is one of the studied poems, I really need you to read the poem a few times. You should, if you need help, you can look to my video on the close annotation of it. But I'd rather you not did that right now. I'd like you to think about your own personal response, ideas and themes brought up, by you in your reading. If you have the chance to speak to someone, it's even better. And using some of the key evidence to back up your ideas. So here is mine. Suddenly he woke and was running. I like how this poem starts in the middle of the action. The speaker is confused and doesn't know what is happening. Hughes focuses on the physical feelings and the soldier's changing attitude towards war. The idea that there is some meaning or some frozen moment seems less ironic in this poem than in Owen's poem. The soldier seems to feel frozen and reflects there must be some importance to what he's doing. Patriotic tear becomes king, honor, human dignity, etc. drop like luxuries in a yelling alarm. All the lies of war that Owen described are picked up here again. The image is less caustic and brutal, but there is the sense that the war is useless and the life of the natural world here is superior. So these are just my examples of what it means to do a personal response. You use evidence, but you're writing about what you think about the poem. You don't necessarily have to do this formal kind of language analysis, but you should be zooming in on key moments, key words in the poem. Okay? So you've read the poem, you've responded to it, you've annotated it for yourself. If you want to do the advanced work, you can annotate with me. Could you now pause and do your own personal response for, let's say, 5 to 7 minutes? I'm just going to imagine you're pausing now. Okay, so let's move on. Before we do the creative writing for this one, let's look at the second poem that kind of shifts the perspective, and then we'll look at writing a creative piece for both. Okay, so first things first. The title of the next poem is Poppies. So poppies are, again, another major symbol of the First World War. Could you look at these two images? What's the difference between these poppies? What does a poppy represent or symbolize? What does it remind you of? What does our culture make it remind us of? So if you notice, the one on the left is alive. It's a flower. It's a beautiful red. Its petals open up and show its internal, what is that called? The stamen, I think. I don't know. My science is poor. And the other petals kind of droop down in a way to really emphasize the openness of that stamen. The many poppies on the left are a flattened out kind of symbol. They're not alive, of course. They're made of cardboard or some sort of paper. And the green really offsets or helps us see that red shape all the more. And what's being emphasized here is that it's a form of remembrance. And it's from a poem by a Canadian poet. I think his name's McRae, in poppy fields, in Flanders fields. Anyway, the poppy is a symbol in our culture of the numerous deaths of the First World War, and then it has come to represent the sacrifice of all wars. And it's worn once a year in November by all sorts of people in our culture to show a memorialization for all those who've given their life in war. Okay, so this poem is called Poppies, and just to give you a kind of way into it, I'm just going to ask you to think about how might the experience of the war differ for the mother than for a boy who goes to war? If you could pause here and just make some predictions about that. Okay, so you predicted that. When we're reading the poem, I'm just going to give you a little bit more heads up. The language is strange because there's a language of war throughout the poem, and then there's also a language of clothing throughout, which I've never really understood why the language of clothing is there. And the structure is such that we go back and forth in time. So we're in the present, we go back to a memory, the release of the boy, we go back into the present, and a kind of yearning for the past. So the key aspect structurally is to think about the way time works in this poem. Okay, so let's take a look at this poem, Poppies by Jane Weir. 3 days before Armistice Sunday, and poppies have already been placed on individual war graves. Before you left, I pinned one on your lapel, crimped petals, spasms of paper red, disrupting a blockade of yellow bias binding around your blazer. So I don't think I can draw a poppy very well, but the word spasms and red make the poppy kind of synonymous. So here there's an actual poppy before you left. We have a time shift already. The poppy reminds me of a wound right away, and spasms particularly to give the sense of a wound bleeding. Sellotape bandaged around my hand. I round up as many white cat hairs as I could, smoothed down your shirt's upturned collar, steeled the softening of my face. Here we get all the intimate, motherly care, the fussing of her boy. I wanted to graze my nose across the tip of your nose, play at being Eskimos like we did when we were little. Further intimacy, physical kind of childish memories. Not childish, childhood, child memories. But she resists this. She resists the impulse to run my fingers through the gelled blackthorns of your hair because she knows he isn't little anymore. And he wouldn't like it. And he's kind of tolerating her, I imagine. All my words flattened, rolled, turned into felt, slowly melting. I was brave. That's a really strange. I was brave. I was brave. As I walked with you, again, brave, bandage, spasm. There's a sense of violence that's underneath the poem. As I walked with you to the front door, threw it open, the world overflowing like a treasure chest. A split second and you were away, so he gets free. He wants to go. Because he's excited by war. You can see him being that, what was it, King Duty, what is it in Hughes' poem, sorry. King, honor, human dignity. King, honor, human dignity. All those illusions this boy has. He's ready. He wants to go. And it's like he's drunk. That's how free he feels. He's drunk on his freedom. After you've gone, I went into your bedroom. This is very heavy-handed. Released a songbird from its cage. So she feels like letting him go. I think is very heavy-handed. Later, a single dove flew from the pear tree, and this is where it has led me. So time shift again. Later, not just a little later, this bird has brought her here to the churchyard walls, which implies graveyard. My stomach busy making tucks, darts, pleats, hatless, without a winter coat or reinforcements of scarf, gloves. It's just heavy-handed language, reinforcements. On reaching the top of the hill, I traced the inscriptions on the war memorial. So we know he's dead now, and we connect that to the opening of the poem. Leaned against it like a wishbone. The dove pulled freely against the sky, an ornamental stitch. I listened, hoping to hear your playground voice catching on the wind. That, for me, is the nicest line. Catching, so it's the hope, the yearning, the loss, death, childhood, all gone. And here we get something that's very different experience of the war, isn't it? It's a mother who's lost her son, and a mother who yearns to have him back and isn't really concerned with the justice of the war and isn't really concerned about whether the war is fair or not, and doesn't even question that, actually, not like Owen and Hughes do, or even, for that matter, even the way Tennyson does. She just really misses her son. And this is a really different poem in that it expresses that emotion in that way. So if I were asking you again to think about what your journal response to the poem would be, I'd want you to look, and I'd want you to pick what you think the key lines are in your own personal feelings about how changing the perspective maybe changes our understanding of the war. So here are mine. Spasms of paper red seem to capture the image of the bullet wound, the symbol of World War I remembrance, and an actual flower. The next stanza is filled with sensual remembrance that emphasize the idea of mourning and loss. I love the way the poem plays with the idea of loss of life and loss of child as in loss of childhood. I get the sense of the boy wanting to grow up and stop being fussed over. He is eager to leave the house and run off. The mother mourns the loss of her boy, but she mourns the loss of her son. This overlap is powerful. Sometimes forcing yourself not to use the quotation can bring you deeper into thinking about what you actually want to say about the poem. But you do need evidence, of course, in the end, so you should come back and then pick quotes that create a pattern or something you can comment on. So for me, your playground voice catching in the wind. Soldiers have a hard time, but they aren't the only ones that suffer. The mothers, sisters, and others all experience the horror of the war, and the voices need to be part of the remembrance of the war. So if you could pause here now and take about 5 to 7 minutes and respond in your journal writing using mine as a model for what you'd like to say and respond to the poem. Again, your ideas make your understanding personal and will get you going further into understanding and eventually analyzing the poem. Okay, so we've read 2 poems about the First World War today. And what I want you now to think about, and it's on page 37 for poppies in your booklet, and page 34 in your booklet for bayonet charge. I have some questions to scaffold for you to think about different experiences of the war. So here's bayonet charge. How does the poet show the confusion in action right away? When you might be running for your life, what kind of things might you notice? How does the sound go silent in the poem? How does the time seem to stop? What kind of changes does the speaker go through in this poem? What has he realized about the war? For poppies, how does war affect people at home differently to people at the front? What sensual memories does the mother have? How does she experience memory in the present? What regrets, if any, does she have? Okay, these are questions to get you thinking, to get you engaging in the poem a little bit deeper. Now I want us to write creatively and to write about the war from different perspectives. And for this exercise, I'd like you to pick either bayonet charge or poppies. So in other words, the soldier's perspective or the mother's perspective. So I'm just going to give you 2 examples, both of mine. I'm just show you in the book. They exist. Here, I'll just pull this out. So here's mine here's bayonet charge on page 34. My written example is here on page 35. And for poppies, my creative writing piece is here on page 38 to help you get a model. But for now, I just want to read the first paragraphs and show you how I've changed the perspective. Bayonet charge. In this picture, you can see the men pouring like ants from the trench. They're tumbling and fumbling, climbing and scrambling over one another. This one here, who is he? He has leapt up like a madman into the air, his body frozen for eternity. He has offered his torso as a sacrifice, his arms pointing up with his bayonet like some clock of the universe. All stars and nations frozen in a moment of collective insanity. In contrast, here's my opening to poppies. When I aimed my hands towards you, I grazed your face, I traced your eyes. When you were born, I drew every line of your face 1,000 times. I whispered all the secrets of my heart and the universe to you. You knew everything, and I knew every line of your body, every thorn of your little hair. But before you left, drunk on freedom, that sense that your wings were unpinned for one moment. Oops. So these were my ways of opening my different versions of those poems and those different perspectives of the war. What I'd like you to do before you start picking the one you'll be emulating is, how do these 2 different poems explore the feelings and emotions in different ways? And how, if you were to take the perspective and take the voice and write in that voice, how would you do that? So if you want to just stop here for a second and just brainstorm, it's an important exercise to kind of to review what you understand about the feelings and emotions that are going on in these poems, and also about the different perspectives that are offered by Bayonet Charge and Poppies. Okay, so you brainstormed your own ideas. If you're having difficulty with this exercise, again, I take you to page 35. This is my version of, I'll just write it here, a Bayonet Charge. Creative Writing Exemplar. And mine is, for Poppies, is on page 38. Page 38, Poppies, Creative Writing Exemplar. You don't have to think they're the greatest things you've ever read. They're just examples to get you started to think about your own creative writing. Okay? So today, what we've worked on is you've started to think about the big questions and themes. Our big theme here was the idea of looking at something from multiple perspectives, particularly the First World War. We looked at the experience of the war from Wilfred Owen's standpoint, and you wrote a letter. You turned his poem into a letter. You looked at the legacy of soldier experience and looked at Ted Hughes's poem, and you've looked at a poem where we looked at the home front and how mothers experienced the war. And you've chosen either Hughes or Weir's to rewrite the perspective. Now, to end, I just want you to stretch and think about what are some of the different ways in the war is presented. Can you look up and research any more World War I poetry to look at the diversity of ways that poets responded to the war? And again, I want you to think about, do you need to know anything about the First World War to enjoy or understand these poems? Or does the context, is it needed at all? At the end of this video, I'm going to give you the links so that you can do deeper annotation for both Bayonet Charge and Poppies. And that is the end of this lesson. I hope that you now notice that these three poems of the war form a kind of legacy of World War I, and that you could compare the way these different perspectives experience and explore the poem, the experience of the war, and the different imagery, the different language, the different structure these poets use to convey their different perspectives and emotions. So finally, as a plenary, I want you to think about, how would you compare the presentation of World War I between these poets? What do they say that's different? How do they say it in similar and different ways? I hope that you are reading and enjoying and learning, and I will talk to you soon.